How's the game going? Thank you. Finally, we got an interesting question. So, I've made some decisions. I am going to go with .NET. I'm going to write the game in F Sharp, and we are probably going to use Unity as the middleware engine, the game engine for version 1. The .NET framework has evolved so beautifully. Xamarin has evolved so beautifully. .NET Core is great. 5 million developers in it. F Sharp 5 looks incredible. I'm super happy and excited about it. And also, .NET for games is great. Xbox can be deployed, and there's a nice path to get it to work on PlayStation as well. So if we're going to do cross-platform, that honestly looks like a great path forward. Bindings look quite good too for Unity. So we'll also see what Unreal 4 is offering. It's either going to be Unity or Unreal 4. Now, in terms of the rollout of the game development studio, probably going to call it something like Frontier Studios and set it up in Wyoming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up in the city of Laramie, Wyoming, and I'll see if I actually get office space at the University of Wyoming or close to the University of Wyoming. In terms of time horizon, likely the second half of 2021. And I'm going to set up 3 groups. There's going to be well, first of all, let's talk about the philosophy of the game development studio. So there are the 3 E's and the N, and every game we build in the studio has to do that. Entertainment, obviously, it has to be fun to play a game. Educational, I'd like you to learn something by playing the game. And experiences, I'd like by playing the game you've had new experiences you've never had before, things that just wow you. You say, oh man, that's amazing. And the N stands for narrative. I want you to be consumed into a story, fall in love with the characters, and so forth. So we'll have working groups for each of these things. People who are responsible for the experiences, people who are responsible for the narrative, people who are responsible for the entertainment, and then obviously we have to talk around how do we make you learn something new from this. It can be a moral lesson, it can be a mechanical lesson like a new skill, whatever the hell it is, we want to do that. In terms of experiences, there's things like Mendy and BCI devices and all these. So there's all these new dimensions from VR, AR, and PCI that can be layered into the game. But in general, there's just all kinds of experiential things you can do. Like I can teach you about hyperbolic geometry or non-Euclidean geometry. The magic system can be algorithmic and constructive, where you build spells and rituals and these types of things. You discover new magic and spells. So technology, I think we have the right stack in mind, and I think we have the right design philosophy, and we've kind of settled on a location for that. It'll take me about 6 months to hire the right core group of people to get things rolling and started. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look into a lot of experimental game technology. So we're going to look into algorithmically generated music. We're going to look into GPT-3. And actually, I'm going to talk to Ben Goertzel about this. I think we might be able to do something far surpassing that for generative dialogue. So when you interact with NPCs, the NPCs are actually using AI to generate dialogue and interactions with you. There's been a lot of crazy good experimental stuff in console-based games where you have, forget the term they use for it, but basically you talk to the computer and it generates responses for you. And there's a lot of these like Zork-style text adventures that are there. So I've thought a lot about that, and we'll do something there. And I think there's great people I know in the AI space that can give us some novel and interesting things. We're also going to, of course, build a very beautiful NPC generator that not only creates unique NPCs in the game, so every NPC is totally unique, you've never seen them before, but also it constructs a beautiful narrative and backstory for the NPC as well. And if there's the right logic built in the game, it can fit that NPC logically into the game. Here's an example. Let's say in Middledwarf, the city of Legends of Valor, that you're in the slums, then the NPCs generated there would be contextual to the slums. So there would be a collection of slum-related professions, dwellings, religions, and variants, and NPCs would be generated within that context, including vitals. So if you're in a poor area, you should probably be underfed, so not corpulent. You should also probably have a disease like malnutrition or perhaps some boils or something. You would see that in that area. NPCs generated in the affluent, rich areas, they would belong to much more structured areas. And also the generative dialogue would reflect that as well. So the NPC generator would say, okay, In the rich areas, you have a better educated class of people. Now, what's nice is referential interactions. So if your character is affluent, bathed, well fed, well dressed, you should actually get a proper response accordingly. You'll be out of place in the slum, you'll be in place in the aristocratic areas, and people respond to you in kind. This is relevant for Legends of Valor because Legends of Valor was actually the first game that I could identify that had randomly generated NPCs, random dialogue trees. They were, selected from a pre-generated set, but they were still randomized, and actually variable interactions. So some of the NPCs didn't want to talk to you, some of the NPCs did want to talk to you, and it was somewhat contextual to the race of the player and gender of the player, whether you pick male or female, or elf, dwarf, human. Those were your three racial choices that you had. So I have a pretty good framework for how to build games, a pretty good framework for where we're going to do the game studio, the tech stack for it, which I think is quite extensive. Originally I was thinking maybe JavaScript would be the way to go, but .NET has really just been a great ecosystem, and why reinvent the wheel? There's just so much magic there with F# 5 and C# 9 and what I see in .NET, what's happened with Xamarin and the cross-app deployment strategy that Microsoft has, and there'll just be no friction with that kind of a framework. The first 6 months will be hiring and tool building, and then what we're going to do is build up departments that focus on those 3 E's and the narrative, the end, and each and every one of them will intersect. And then the other thing is that we're going to bring in some outside experts to kind of look at what we've done. So we're going to write the entire story for the game and all the NPCs, and then we'll bring literary critics and philosophers in to actually kind of look at the overarching narrative and story. Like the wisecrack guys, for example, do on YouTube when they talk about things. And we'll say, well, were there any themes or allegories or other things that we could perhaps refine or things. So we'll rewrite the scripts a few times until we get quite happy. In the meantime, the tech guys will be building out the world engine and the NPC generator and getting the graphics assets where they need to be and so forth. And yeah, actually for the NPCs, we'll do motion capture. So you wear the green suits and put on the dots. And if you guys actually want to see how that's done in practice, there's some great behind-the-scene videos for God of War with the guy who played Teal'c in Stargate, who does the voice for Kratos, and then also Hellblade. If you want to see Senua and how they do that, and you can do it at a very low cost. It used to be millions of dollars, but you can actually set up a motion capture studio for about $500,000. It's really incredible, and it's top technology. You record in 8K, and you feed it all the assets into the game engine and all these other things, and you actually get realistic facial expressions and emotions, and when they cry, it cries. Everything renders just absolutely beautifully, especially with the upcoming consoles, the Xbox X and PlayStation. Now, this is relevant to Cardano. We will put some form of blockchain-based DRM system and non-fungible asset system into Legends of Valor when we rebuild the whole thing. So your licenses for the game will be a token on Cardano, and your game items will be inside Cardano as well, somehow, some way, and tradable. So if you find something very unique, then those unique items you can potentially resell, and maybe we'll connect it to trusted hardware or not. This is another reason to go with .NET, is that there are SGX extensions for that, other things like that we can enforce. So a lot to think about, but I have pondered it, and a lot of things I really want to do, like algorithmically generated music. I looked into the Uterpi project, which came from Yale, and they did computer-based music generation, and I've also looked at a lot of AI-driven music design. And so what I want to do is a hybrid soundtrack where we pay a symphony and we generate a beautiful soundtrack. New World Computing did an incredible job with Heroes of Might Magic, and I really think Troika Games did a great job with Arcanum as well. It would be beautiful to do a soundtrack. You can go to an Eastern European orchestra and rent them for a few weeks for pennies. It's not very expensive to do that, and you can just get incredible quality. In terms of the conductor, the composer to work with them, Max Richter or Raman Djawadi would be a good choice. I even thought actually about seeing if, because I have a friend who works with me. He does the Waves investment. Before he worked on the C fund for Waves, He was Trent Reznor's manager. So it would be cool to bring Ramin Djawadi, who did the soundtrack for Game of Thrones and a lot of other things like Westworld, for example, together with Reznor, have them collaborate together and do the baseline soundtrack, but then have AI music artists come in and do the generative music component. So you basically generate music inspired from that base stuff, but it's connected to inputs inside the game world. So that's an example of experiences where we bring something new to the gaming world where you don't have this repetitive soundtrack that happens over and over again. Instead, you have a range and you kind of mix it up and randomly sample it through. And it's connected to your character, it's connected to your interactions and what's going on in the game, plus the baseline that Djawadi and Reznor did, if they do it. And then what's nice about that means that your replayability, you never hear the same soundtrack twice. It's always new, and it's actually always novel and interesting. If you're interested in this, there's actually IBM Research used an AI to generate new Beatles songs. And if you type in like IBM Beatles on YouTube, you can listen to, it's like Daddy's Car or something like that is the name of the song, but actually a song written by a computer that sounds like a Beatles song. So there's an enormous amount of progress that's been made there, but it's mostly in the lab, and it needs to be pulled out of the lab and put into an actual game engine. I'd like to also have a variable physics engine as well, where you can play around with the gravity coefficient, you can play around with atmospheric conditions, all these other physics coefficients, and so as a consequence, you can manipulate the world. Your magic system should be the parameterization vehicle for that. So spells allow you to change these things, or certain environmental effects would change these types of things. Like, for example, like a fireball spell, third level spell, standard Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it's like the big transition when you go from level 4 to level 5 as a wizard. You get fireball. Okay, great. Well, if you actually could do something like that, it would be like creating a pyroclastic cloud. If you see a volcano erupt, you'll see what that means, especially the more powerful versions of that. So the wind is as damaging as the fire can be. So, you know, if you have a proper physics engine, then a spell should also have physical implications. Magica did this, and also the Divinity series did this from Larian Studios. And you could actually mix and match environmental effects. So if you wet the ground and then use a lightning spell, then it conducts it and causes all kinds of problems, okay? So it would be really cool to have the physics engine give you these new experiences and so forth, especially given that you can have like real life aspects, like the bricks can have weight, you have telekinesis, you can move them, the weight is contingent to the damage and so forth. And really intuitive, clever players can do interesting things. So, and also I'm a big fan of the Portal series, and so it'd be really cool to put that into the Magic system as well. So the more roguish characters can like portal from one side to the other side, jump and stab someone or something like that. So a lot to think about across the spectrum, but I have a pretty good framework for all of it. We'll build it up to a certain threshold where it's, you know, almost ready, and then likely what we'll do is do what Pillars of Eternity did and Pathfinder did and these other games, and go and do a crowd sale on Kickstarter and also through other platforms as well, and raise a lot of funding for the game. So I'll pay to get it to a certain level of prominence, and once we de-risk everything and we have an approach, it's just a matter of roadmap, and then that's a great way of pre-distributing the game because you're selling software licenses for that, and this will give the community a chance to participate, because like Pillars of Eternity or other things, if you put enough money into it, you can become a character in the game or have some control over the narrative of the game or get special rewards or so forth. So the short answer to your question is great.